the days, the people aren't with
Please be seated for tonight's talk. Sit facing in a way that you can make eye contact. And in a moment, we will be reciting the Gata Anupang, the Sutra, on page 8, if you have a liturgy book. If you need a liturgy book, they're in the back of the zendo on a table. Gata on opening the sutra, the Dharma in compro profound and infinitely subtle is rarely encountered even in millions of ages. Now we see it, hear it, receive and maintain it. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning.
Thank you all for being here tonight. It's an interesting time to kind of be anywhere. The week between. This is a really nice song by Jonathan Colton I really like. Very comedic singer, but he sings about this week between Christmas and New Year's, and regardless of kind of your family and cultural background, you're impacted by this week between, and it's got an interesting shape and a rhythm and a feel that doesn't kind of manifest at any other time of the year, for good or ill, depending on our personal situations. It can be a very challenging week. It can be very joyful, melancholy, depressive, optimistic, And for many, and the source of that in some cases for many of us is because this is also a time to be with family, which can be, again, it can be joyful, and it can be melancholy, and it can be challenging, regardless of where in the wheel of our own lives we find ourselves. It's beautiful and untradeable and not easy, and we all have our own version of it. So most of us, over the first part of this week between, have probably had a lot of opportunity, whether we know it or not, to practice right speech. which is what I want to talk about. I'm kind of working my way through the Eightfold Path. A little bit of a teaser trailer for those of you who have done Jukai. It's going to be part of that Encountering the Lam Rim as well, where the teachers are going to go through a lot of the core basic teachings of our tradition, including the Eightfold Path. And the more and more I look at it, the whole thing, I mean, that is, the Buddha has his awakening, and then when put upon to explain it to people, he comes up with the Four Noble Truths, and the first three are a statement of the situation. Life involves suffering, suffering as a cause, and there's a cessation. And they go, and how? And then he has his buy my book moment where he says, the Eightfold Path. And we go through all of these things: right view, right intention, right speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. And all of his teaching is about how these things are an engagement and in a practice driven at alleviating suffering. And speech is a very particular one. It's at a very important node in the whole thing. Now, they call it the Eightfold Path, but again, I always really like to reemphasize, is it's not really sequential. All of these things arise continuously, moment to moment. We have to engage them as they do. And there is still, however, some sort of order. And it's an order of influence, if not causation. I've already spoken about right view and right intention, and out of intention, things manifest. And generally, when things manifest out of our intentions, thoughts arise. If we pour energy into these thoughts, they develop into intentions, and if they manifest further, they become speech and action. Usually the first ways that they're at least externally visible. Left with our own thoughts, we can create our own hell realms, we can create our own heavens, and we can create our own, mundane sloggings just internally. But when we put enough intention, when we feed these thoughts, when we feed these intentions enough, they do boil over, they do manifest in the world. And speech and action tend to be the first ones. So we've sat 2 periods. Many of us noticed that thoughts arise in that. That's the natural function of mind. And this intention that drives speech largely comes from the practice of which thoughts do we engage with and which ones do we not engage with, and in what way do we feed them. There's this old kind of story, I think it's Cherokee in its origin, where they talk about us. Inside us there are 2 wolves, and one is dark and one is light. And which wolf do you feed? And there's the story of the old elder speaking to the child about the impact of feeding the light wolf as opposed to the dark wolf, and being able to see that there are in fact 2 wolves in front of you. And my favorite response to the whole thing is actually, what do you do with these wolves? The comedian's response is, of course, immediately go see the doctor, because the correct number of wolves that should be inside you is 0, and you have a medical problem if they are there. It's worth looking into. If someone tells you if they can show you there are wolves inside you, Shukin can probably make a good recommendation of the best ER to go to. But this idea, this actual answer of how we feed our thoughts and how they manifest, it's a very simple concept, and people have addressed it from so many different angles, that what we develop internally is ultimately going to show up externally. Now, the text that I wanted to reference to this tonight is out of the Samyutta Nikaya, which is part of the Pali Canon, the Buddha's earliest teachings. And I really liked what I found, which was basically just a simple summary talking about what it is. There's all sorts of other sections that talk about how to practice right speech. But the particular section that I found actually also has a teaching that Rinzin particularly leaned into a couple of years ago. This is the same sutra that talks about the concept of spiritual friendship and good friendship, where Ananda had a conversation with the Buddha, and he asked about the spiritual life, that good friendship and comradeship and spiritual friendship was at least half the process, half the practice. And the Buddha corrected him. He says, no, this is the entire process to be connected in community. And so taking on this practice, being able to do it here, first off, with all of you is wonderful. This is the same sutra that introduces the importance of right speech. In fact, all of the Eightfold Path talking about what each thing is and how right speech is a necessary practice. All these things should be seen more as practices than anything else. But a practice towards what? We can hold up ethics for their own good, to be good, to manifest good in the world, all sorts of different motivations. I have my own children, I teach school, and I encounter a lot of kids trying to, do good and to speak well, and they're doing it for a lot of different reasons. Some is because they want the gold star. In my case, literally a sticker in their book that I do with some of my students when things are going well. Others, it's specifically out of fear. They don't want negative consequence. And so when they do speak, it's entirely to not antagonize. It can be done from a place of fear, trying to find the right thing to say at the right time. Right speech also includes saying nothing, which on its own isn't right speech, because saying nothing can also be that same motivation. It can be avoiding, it can be hiding, it can be avoiding conflict. I speak as a very non-conflict oriented person. And so when the Buddha spoke of what right speech is, it was very simple. And what monks is right speech? Abstinence from false speech, abstinence from malicious speech, abstinence from harsh speech, abstinence from idle chatter. This is called right speech. And the initial teachings of anything, of course, in an old religious tradition, always needs more clarification. And so there's more text, there's more explanation over time. And we also see this in the expression of our vows in Jukai when we take the precepts. We have 3 precepts directly addressing speech and one kind of indirectly addressing it. We take up the way of not speaking falsely. We take up the way of not discussing the faults of others. And speech is involved as well when we take up the way of not praising ourselves and blaming others. We also have that not defaming the 3 treasures that always struck me as a speech-oriented one. Still starting with intention, still starting with thought, but how does it make manifest in the world? For us, a lot of times, speech will precede action. And I can remember, too, Rinsen and Doan, even in my own Jukai, which is like, 13, 14 years ago now, bringing up stuff that, it rung true from, studying systematic moral theology in university. It rung true with what was unspoken in my heart, a lot of the same sort of notes in the chord that drew me to practice. To look at the speech that we offer and ask ourselves when we have these kind of reflective moments, is what I say in this moment true? Is what I say in this moment helpful? And is what I say in this moment well timed? Is it appropriate now? Is now the moment for it? It's all a reflection of other things I've heard from the teachers. Again, just going to that general concepts of ethics and moral practice within Jukai and on the path. That it's not just, here's a list of what we don't say, here's what we should say. We have to meet this moment, and we have to, in that moment, intimately encounter time, place, position, and degree. And there's a different way of training for that than if we're trying to work off a list of rules. When I was in university, I had the pleasure of taking a course called Systematic Moral Theology at the seminary associated with the college, which was associated with the university. I still remember Father McGrattan went on to become rector of the seminary. He was a very large proponent of this, and he said something to the effect, particularly to the seminarians, of which only 4 of us were not. The course was something offered at the seminary, but it was also available at the college. And so I had taken it, and he said something to the effect at the beginning. It's like, if your understanding of how to act in the world in terms of your ethical conduct is to find a list of rules and adhere to it and see things in that very black and white, is it on the list or not? You are going to hate this course and probably do quite poorly in it. That we have guiding, although there are guiding principles, and he was referring to the teachings of both the Old and the New Testament in this. He was very interested in looking at the code of the heart that each of those things was an attempt to explain. What it was in his experience to speak and act in union with God. And whether that's how we encounter our spiritual practice or any innumerable ways, that we encounter this practice on the cushion, we come back to this question of how do I act in a way that does not create suffering? How do I act in a way that alleviates my own suffering and the suffering of others? And it shows up in simple ways, but it's constant and it's nonstop. And again, these weeks between are good opportunities. We have mundane conversation. We have difficult conversations. We have, God, I wish I could avoid this conversations. And we have avoided conversations that maybe could have or should have been met, along with avoided conversations that maybe that was worth not having. Whatever your version of in terms of what you encounter with your family. Has anyone who's had their big family gatherings within the last several weeks? Who has yet to do that? Yeah. It shows up in all sorts of ways. Sometimes it's by distance. Sometimes it's the household. Sometimes it's expanded. Christmas Eve used to be, what was it, hundreds? Several hundred. It always felt like several hundred. It was a rented hall every time. And this Christmas, it was, what was it? Mom and dad, and means mom and dad. And her siblings, their spouses, their children. One of my children there with their spouse, my other one at home because they were feeling kind of sick. One of the two dogs of the families. None of my cats were invited. I just realized that's slight now. And Rachel stayed back too for my mother-in-law, who's undergoing chemotherapy for incurable cancer right now. And so a lot of what unfolds is about supporting mom and dad. They've just made a move to the house next door, which had been Grandma's house. And it's got this beautiful look out onto the Detroit River, right as the Detroit River opens up into Lake Erie. And I can look out a little to the left and see the stacks of Fermi 2, and a little further out to the left, to the south. And then just over the horizon is Ohio, Toledo. And we kind of had that. It was nice. It was kind of gray that day, but there's been some beautiful sunsets there. They bought the house from the estate of Enmay's grandmother, who passed away this past summer, just as we were discovering the recurrence of cancer with her mother. And it's a newer home, but built on the site of the home where the family was raised for so long. And we would swim in the Detroit River every summer. And I, especially where I live, I love telling people I swim in the Detroit River because people kind of get this ick look on their face, right? Because it's like everything that's in that water. There are some nice bays protected from the currents there, though, so it wasn't so bad. My father-in-law even did work with IRCA, the Essex Regional Conservation Authority, clean beaches, and study the animals to see the impact of pollution. And I was listening to a podcast recently about Gord Downey and his work with pollution in the Great Lakes. And right where I am, looking south to Toledo, and this beautiful place where the sun sets, I know there's all this industry upriver. And it comes down, I have no doubt of it. Again, I I don't have my third arm. I don't know how much my life has been shortened. Probably not at all, noticeably by swimming in that water. But sure, it's not the cleanest water in the world. But where do you clean up that water? Do you clean it up right there at the shore you're standing on? Or do you clean it up upstream? Both are good. And both are needed. And we can apply the same kind of concept to the idea of how do we actually cultivate right speech? Do we just cultivate it, or do we hopefully we cultivate it in this moment? Ask it as a question. Okay, do we cultivate it in this very moment with Aunt Kathy bringing up that topic you really hoped Aunt Kathy wouldn't bring up at the party? Or do you actually cultivate right speech in all the moments that have led up to this moment? Actually cultivated in the past. Both are good. And both are needed. So, practicing in the past. How do we practice like that? Well, the moment, let's talk about now. Let's talk about the shore we're on. Our mindfulness in this moment, paying attention to things like our intent. Do I speak with malice right now? Knowing how it feels as it arises, paying attention to it right now. The intensity, is this speech going to be harsh? It's such a simple question, but one that the Buddha primarily taught to, is it going to cause suffering? It's not a simple question because there's immediate and long term. We want to find the best answer. And what is the purpose of why I'm speaking? Am I alleviating suffering? Is this idle chatter? Is it gossip? Is it harmful? In our best moments, we can usually meet that pretty good. How easy or hard it is to make the choices of meeting that moment well is going to determine it's going to be determined a lot by our habit energies, our karmic weight around different situations. And how heavy that is going to be is actually the work that we do in the past. Which is really neat because we're actually always adding to our past, right? So we have in this moment, this very moment, the opportunity to create our past. Like every step you take, there's a new step behind you, kind of thing. And so what I mean by this, how skillfully we meet our now is influenced by our past practice. So what are our practices that help us meet this moment where we can speak skillfully or not? For those who have been practicing here for a while, we see so much of it. Zazen. We do this work to unhook, to become less sticky, to be less immediately pulled by our reaction, our thought, our conditioning. And that little less stickiness gives us more freedom to move. It gives us more option in the moment. We always have option in the moment, but when we're tethered to what arises, our action is more a reaction. It's more automatic. And when we have that room, we can see the free choice that is not always an option. If you don't see it, it's not an option. If you can't feel it, it's not an option. But there's so much of practice that is not about really creating something new, it's uncovering what is already there. Perfect and complete, lacking nothing, and you can use a little work. We do it in the liturgy. That's teaser trailer, that unpacking the liturgy. That is encountering the Lam Rim. If you've seen our Sunday liturgy, that is the spark notes of the Lam Rim, which is this thick, gigantic Tibetan explication of the path of liberation, because they systematize and heavily explain everything. So we cultivate compassion for ourselves, we can cultivate compassion for each other. Even in some of the simplest things that we do. If you've ever attended a meeting here, even our Arts Night, we start by setting intention. And that thought that drives speech and action. We set our intention for the time we're going to spend together. So throughout this entire training matrix, we're training ourselves in the skills of meeting the moment. Now, each of those rights, right view, right intention, right action, right speech, right livelihood, each of those things arises in the moment. Tonight we talk about the idea of speech, and in talking about it, I can't decouple it from intention, because it seems like very much the next step of arising. So all these things we do in our training, the sitting, which doesn't necessarily look directly tied to right speech, going through all of our liturgy, we have a section called Generating Love and Compassion. We chant things like the Heart Sutra, which are these explications of the transient emptiness and no nature of things. All these things, this is the work we do upstream. This is the training days and the moment right now that you find yourselves in that difficult conversation, or the moment that some word, some presence of speech is required, is called for. That's game day. That's the critical moment. And that work is always behind us and always being built, because we just keep shaving off moments of our lives and building up our past. So as we do each breath, each daily liturgy, each period of Zazen, we build this capacity. And then by turning our mind and turning our attention in the moment towards speech, when that's the thing that's called for, that's our work on the shore. Doing both is good, and doing both is needed. When I was reading and writing for this, one of my favorite things that I've had enough opportunities to talk now, that I've brought it up several times, is this shouldn't be a tear-up moment, but I like it. And it hits me in a warm way. My first question to a Zen teacher was, how do I take what's on the cushion and get it to show up in the world? And he said, sit more, and rang me out. Like back in the mid-90s. And I thought, that was rather dismissive. Okay, well. And then when Rinsen could start doing Dokusan, I brought him that question, and I got the same damn answer. And so I thought, okay, probably worth looking at a little bit more. And the more that I encounter these things, the more I see, like, turning back to Zazen, turning back to the liturgy, all of these things are the seeds. All of these things are the tools that inform and teach and empower our capacity to meet the moment in the spirit of, right fill in the blank, right speech, right livelihood, right action. And I know when my self-talk kicks in for me personally, my self-talk is rarely good. If my self-talk is positive, these are some of the struggles I have. If my self-talk is positive, it's because I am already really struggling and near the edge of not engaging well with this. When that manifests, when it comes out of my mouth, even before I came to practice, there was this moment of just utter devastation. That it went from something that was here to something that was out. Very grateful for the hurt that I feel when that happens, that I at least have the capacity to recognize that. And is it there if the speech emerges into action? When that speech comes out, the thought can feed that one wolf. The speech is like an all-you-can-eat buffet for that one wolf. And in that moment, I've shaved that off, and that's become a part of my past. And the only thing, oh my God, everything keeps coming back to Zazen. Jeez. The only thing that I can do is see it, acknowledge it, and then return to right now. And hopefully meet that next moment a little bit better. We dump pollution upstream. It may seem impossible to clean the shoreline that we stand on. For ourselves, in all beings, may we build our capacity for right speech in the now and in our ever-growing past. And may we manifest right speech in the now and all of the dwindling days of our future, throughout all space and time for all beings. May it be so.
Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Are there any announcements? Okay, I have some. My name is Kensei. I want to tell you about 2 different cohorts we have forming soon. The first one is the Establishing Your Buddhist Practice class. This is intended for folks who haven't taken Jukai yet or who are just interested in developing their home Buddhist practice more and learning more about what happens at the temple. That begins in January, and there are no prerequisites for it. Just there's a flyer on the table if you're interested to sign up for that. And the other one is related to what Reverend Kaishan was talking about tonight. The Lam Rim class will be starting. There's an information session in January. That's a 2-year cohort program for people who've already taken Jukai. So if you're interested in that, be on the lookout to get signed up for it. And I think that's it. Thank you. Oh, Shugen?
Game night?
What?
Game night?
Game night, New Year's Eve, yes. That is a week from today. And it'll be at the temple. It starts at 6 o'clock.
I think it's sooner than that.
Huh?
Much sooner than that.
Sunday.
What is today?
The 27th.
I thought today was Sunday. So it's in a few days, New Year's Eve, 6 p.m. Come play games, learn about time. There's going to be a ceremony at midnight, ringing the bell 108 times and some things. Sounds like it's going to be fun. Bring your instruments. Yes. Anything else? Please restore the Zendo.
Well, you said that, I thought it was. That's the biggest mistake I made today.
No, that's 2024. Still, my mind's kind of blown still. A week from today. I have a lot of things I need to do.
Yeah.